One of the things I've always tried to do is to kind of set a direction for our business and create a sense of forward motion towards that big objective.
First, I want to start with your background, though. You have a fascinating background. You ended up in Asia very early, so I'd love to hear the how and the why behind that.
I guess I've always felt a little bit like an outsider generally throughout my life. Having grown up, started my life in South America in Chile and then moved to the US when I was 5 or 6 years old, didn't speak any English, arrived in Erie, Pennsylvania, small town in Pennsylvania, and saw snow for the first time in my life and kind of started life there. And then one of my first jobs as a newspaper delivery boy, I thought, wow, you can actually make money when you're an 11-year-old kid. I worked hard at school and got into UPenn, and went to Wharton. And then when I was at school, I was always just, I guess, naturally interested in international business. And I studied international business at Wharton as an undergraduate. And then when I graduated, I went to work for Bain & Company, the consulting firm, but I had met my girlfriend in college, who was from Hong Kong. This was pre-internet days, pre-email days. And the only way to stay in touch was either to write letters or to make very expensive phone calls. Calling from Boston to China in the 1980s cost something like $10 a minute, which is very unaffordable. And so I had to figure out how I could keep this relationship going. And I managed to convince someone on the Bain team. They had one client in Hong Kong that had been staffed out of the London office, and I managed to get myself onto that case. So I went to Hong Kong in 1989 and basically never left, never came back.
I want to first ask, what do you think being an outsider, as you said, has helped you from a business and investing perspective?
I always felt like I was a little bit on the outside looking in. And so when I went to Asia, I remember thinking about, what is so unique about this place in Hong Kong and what's going on in Asia versus what I'm familiar with now in the US. And I was trying to draw some comparisons and contrasts. And that's when I picked up on what's going on in private equity and venture capital in those days. And it was completely almost unheard of in Hong Kong and Asia. And so I was sort of attuned to that, thinking there's a gap here and there's some sort of a gap in the market. And there could be an opportunity, so I better stay alert and see what happens.
So if we take that leitmotif of you looking at things in a different way and trying to compare and contrast, right, what would that look like in Asian market versus US or European markets?
I think one of the key differences is that it's just less developed. And so the markets are more inefficient. We like to talk about the idea that there's more structural alpha in Asia than there is in the US and Europe in terms of the markets being less developed, less efficient. Where does this alpha come from? It comes from a couple of different areas. I think number one, we're operating in an environment with a lot more growth. Some structural growth drivers like, middle-class consumer-led growth in healthcare, in consumption of services, things like migration of cloud of software services relatively early in the adoption phase, even an economy like Japan. I think the second factor is just the relative supply and demand of capital in the region versus the opportunity set. And you take a market like Japan right now, they're just starting to experience the levels of shareholder activism that you've had in developed markets historically. And a lot of these issues that have been dealt with over the years in the West and are still playing out are just getting started. We're really just scratching the surface in Asia as these trends start to play out. And I think the other interesting contrast is that the sources of liquidity and the types of liquidity that we're able to access in terms of our exit strategy are a lot less correlated than people imagine in the way that we access the markets for liquidity.
It's a really interesting discussion to have. But when you started BPEA in 97, what did you see as the opportunity set? And what was, in your mind, it was obviously different than the US or European private equity markets. Mm-hmm. What did the risks look like to you?
But when we started off, it was really about, in those days, it was about investing in privately owned businesses that were eventually going to be taken public, primarily in those days in Hong Kong. It was a minority strategy, a kind of a pre-IPO strategy where you take a stake and then, a couple of years later, the company goes public and the company's grown and the multiple expands and you make money. That strategy worked reasonably well. But then we had a couple of things happen. We had the tech bubble in 2000. And then we also then had the GFC in 2007. And we realized, first of all, it was A, too opportunistic, not focused enough, and B, the minority strategy has some drawbacks to it related to governance, related to your ability to get liquidity. And so we evolved that strategy to become more focused eventually on buyouts. And now we're 100% focused on buyouts. Then we started to also become more thematic in top-down thinking about where we wanted to invest in the sectors that we wanted to be exposed to. And that also, I think, created more of a tailwind in the kind of underlying growth of the businesses that we're investing in overall.
You thought a lot about building your firm and then ultimately becoming part of EQT. What did you see in EQT that said this is a great fit for the business and from a culture perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things I've always tried to do is to kind of set a direction for our business and create a sense of forward motion towards that big objective. Most people are motivated by being part of something larger than themselves, including myself. In the back of my mind, I always was thinking, how do we build the deal-making machine that we have and the funds, fund 1, fund 2, fund 3, how do we build a business out of that? How do we actually create an enterprise out of this that's going to last? And so in order to do that, you need to institutionalize the business. We considered going public at a certain point. And then it became obvious to me that the industry, I thought to myself that there's a trend here that is going to lead to industry consolidation for a couple of reasons. One is the bar of what's required to be successful in doing deals and in generating returns keeps getting higher and higher and higher in order to compete. But importantly, also on the client side, or LPs, you could see the trends there, which was fewer, larger relationships. They didn't want to have 100 GPs managing 100 fund programs for them. They wanted to have 20 or 30 relationships that could do 3 times as much for them. And that's more efficient for them. And over time also, it started to be evident that the larger firms had certain advantages in terms of the kinds of returns and the sort of access to deals and the ability to deliver consistent outcomes over time and sort of institutionalizing their businesses through multiple generations of management teams. And there's going to be the big global firms that consolidate and have a broad offering. I think being in the middle is quite challenging. In my mind, it became very compelling to become part of a global business that either we do it ourselves to become global and large, which is going to be hard because the industry is developed already, or we become part of a bigger organization that already has achieved 80% of that, and we can be the other 20%. And that's essentially what happened in bringing the two businesses together.
What a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Michael. That was very, very, very good. I enjoyed that.
Likewise.
Thanks a lot.